So for a while, I've been having some problems with this washer. It wasn't washing very well. And all of a sudden in the other room, I hear this big clunk. And I thought it was just a dish falling down in the drawer or something like that, but it turns out to be something totally different. So some of the symptoms were the washer turns on, but nothing happens. You can't hear any water moving. The water is stagnant down in the bottom, and things just aren't working correctly. So moving on here, what really happened? So what happened, the big clunk I heard, was that the secondary filter screen tore and it jammed the main motor. So now you've got two problems. You've got the problem of replacing that filter, right, that tore and jammed up the system. And then I've also got the motor that's not working at all. Now, that may or may not happen in your case. It may just be a jammed up filter and you get lucky. But in my case, the motor actually stopped working. You can see here on the filter that the screen is all crunched up, jammed up in the system. That's what stopped the motor and caused the problem. All right, so the first thing you got to do, of course, is order a filter for the main pump. So there's really no good way to, quote unquote, repair that filter. It's toast. So you replace the entire filter assembly. You can see here it's got the little filter in here as well as the housing that it goes in. So you just replace that. It's the W11084-156 pump filter that you need to order. I ordered mine online. I can't even remember where. It wasn't Amazon, but you might find it cheaper at Amazon. I'm not quite certain. You'd want to take a look. Okay, so we'll talk about where that goes and how you put that in later on in the video. All right, so to get started on this whole thing, make sure you shut off your power. That's kind of a given. Then you'll want to pull everything out of the center of the washer, all the baskets, anything that's loose. This arm down in the bottom, you can take that out pretty easily. Get as much water out. To do that, you're going to want to get these two screws right over here in the right-hand picture. There's two screws that hold this whole assembly in, the filter assembly, and you can get to water in there. So I just use towels to soak it up and get all that water out. Then what you're going to want to do is unscrew the two screws that hold the washer in place under your counter. This washer is not heavy at all. You can easily do it. It's just, I don't know, maybe 20 pounds at most. So it's very light. Anyways, once you've got those loose, you pull that washer out from under the counter. You'll see these hoses in the back there. Make sure you don't break or kink or anything like that. Any of these hoses, you've got an electrical line in there as well. Once you've got that done, lay down some towels or a blanket or something and tilt the front of the washer. You can see the front right here in this picture. Tilt the front of the washer down on those blankets or pillows or whatever you have, so you don't scrape up the front. That way you can get to the back of the machine and actually pull that motor out, or I should say bottom of the machine, and pull that motor right out. All right, so to remove the main motor and main pump, you can see the motor down here on the bottom. It's covered in a white shroud. This is the main pump area where the filter is. So there's three water connections right here, here, and here. This one's got a reusable clamp. This one does not need a clamp. It's just a friction fit. And this one has a clamp that you can see down here, is kind of one of those non-reusable type clamps that you have to have a special crimping device to use. So I replaced that with a regular automotive screw down type clamp. So you'll need to have a clamp available unless you have one of those clamping tools. And here you can see the friction fit. It just slides in onto the pump right there. All right, so when you pull this out, you're going to notice that there's a little metal tab right here on the pump, and it slots into kind of a rubber slot right there. That has to come loose as well. And of course, you've got electrical connections that you're going to have to disconnect on the motor. Not real difficult. It'll be real obvious. You can't screw up the electrical connections. There's only one way that they fit in. All right, so moving along. This is what the pump assembly looks like. You've got your main filter down here. You've got hose, hose, and hose. And then you've got 3 Torx type screws or bolts that hold this whole assembly onto the motor. And you can't see the third one, it's in the back here. So again, you've got bolts going through this device right here and kind of in this area. So you'll have to loosen those up to get that apart. Those are all Torx, so just keep that in mind. You'll need Torx bits to get this apart. So to get the filter out of the way, you'll see the filter. It's just under the pump cover, right? It'll be all shredded most likely. Go ahead and pull out these small pieces that are inside that housing. So this ring, this plastic piece, and set those aside. Make sure you take pictures when you're doing this so that you've got an idea of how to put it back together. It's not difficult, but sometimes you can forget where things go and in what orientation they go. All right, so there's our factory part that we purchased online, and we'll use that again later on in this process. Here's that metal tab. This is a better close-up of that metal tab that fits them itself. All right, moving along. So at this point, you've got the filter out. It's time to fix the motor. So if your motor is simply not working, this is a process you're going to have to go through. All right, so when you start this, make sure you take this caution warning seriously. Right here is a capacitor, okay? Capacitors can store a tremendous amount of energy. This should not have any energy stored in it. However, depending on the failure of the pump itself, it may have stored enough energy. So what you do is short the leads, being very careful not to touch the wire that you're shorting the leads with. Go ahead and short those together and make sure you don't have a charge on that capacitor. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do is, flip that pump over so you can see the motor like you see here. There's a white shroud that actually goes around this whole thing. You can see 4 bolts that hold that shroud on to the motor assembly. Of course, you need to pull those bolts off and work the shroud off to get to this level. All right, to find the actual problem, the problem is that this thermal fuse has a good chance of blowing. So you have to purchase a thermal fuse. I'll put the part number in the notes when I post this up. And you can just get that from Amazon, of course. But something I want to call out here is that you notice this white wire right here runs along here and comes down here. That's one end. And then on this end, you've got a red wire that connects to the other side of the fuse. It's a very simple device. It's a simple thermal fuse, so nothing fancy there. And you'll have to replace that. All right, so to do that, before you get into this, into removing this fuse, you'll have to actually cut this webbing around here, but you need to make sure that you keep the webbing in place for the rest of the windings. All right, so the way I did that is I just super glued all these points so that the web doesn't just disintegrate, and everything around it is super glued in place. Let it set for about a half an hour so everything was solid, and then I just cut this webbing here so that I could remove this fuse, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. All right. So here's the webbing removed and a close-up of the new thermal fuse. When you put this new thermal fuse in, you'll want to use crimp connectors, okay? You don't want to solder this in. This area can build up heat. It's got vibration. There's a lot of reasons not to solder this fuse in. So use crimp connectors of some sort. I just use simple crimp connectors. You can see our red wire coming in here, but you'll also notice here that I've got some heat shrink tubing that I put in place before I put the fuse in, right? So on the white, you can't see it, but on the white cable, I've got another bit of heat shrink, and then I'm going to cover both sides with another piece of heat shrink. So heat shrink here, heat shrink over here, and then I cover the whole fuse with a bit of heat shrink to make sure that we don't have any shorts or anything like that going on. All right, so once I've got that fuse in place, we want to make sure that it's in good contact with the coils themselves. All right, so I've got it right up against the coils, just like the original was. You can see your white cable coming in here, the red cable coming in over here, and it's just snugged up against that. So what I did is I used zip ties to take place of that nylon webbing. The rest of that nylon webbing was glued in place, so it's intact and tight. But where I removed it, I went ahead and used zip ties. Depending on how you do this, you could go ahead and zip tie the whole thing. But you want to make sure all these cables are nice and tight against that winding or the coils of this motor. You also want to make sure that there's plenty of clearance here, so that none of the zip ties or any of the string actually hits the fan blades that you see here for this motor. That would cause potential problems. So you can see here we've got zip tie, zip tie, zip tie, all holding this in good contact with the coils, keeping the coil wire in place and making sure that nothing's moving around when the motor's operational. So once you've got that done, actually I'll go back here. Once you've got that done, then you're going to want to replace that shroud. It's going to go around the coils like so, and get that in place. The shroud is absolutely necessary because the shroud is also the guide for this bearing. If you don't have the shroud on, your motor won't turn properly. It'll just make contact with the side magnets of the motor itself, and it won't turn. So you have to have that shroud in place properly. All right, so once you've got that back together, flip your motor over, and here's our pump assembly. This is the new filter. And there's only one way to put this filter in properly. So it's got a little tab right here that you'll see, and that tab fits right into that slot. You can see that in a close-up right here. You can see the new screen, the new filter screen right there, and that's the housing for the filter, and so on. So once you've got that put in place, then you simply replace the pump housing with the 3 bolts that go in through these slots, and then you reassemble your washer. Go ahead and install it back into the washer in reverse of how you deinstalled it. And you'll probably have to clean up the front of your washer. During this whole process, I did get dirty, icky finger marks all over the front of the washer, and yeah, so it makes a mess. Go through your testing. Now, when I did this, there's a process that I'm going to link to in the notes to reset this machine. You may not have to go through this process. It doesn't happen every time, but I did some reading, and there is a reset process when you do a replacement of the main motor. So just keep that in mind. At any rate, once I went through that reset process, it simply worked fine. It worked very well. One thing I did find out during this whole process was that there's a cleanser that you can use in your dishwasher. You probably had to do it once a month, according to what I was reading. You can get it in tablet form or in liquid form, and you just run a cycle with this cleanser. It cleans out all the potential gunk and paper and stuff that might get stuck in that filter. I think that's one way to keep these filters from destroying themselves and keeping the dishwasher running a whole lot better. So just keep that in mind. I'll put a link into the notes as well for those products as well. I bought mine at Walmart. It worked great. I'm going to continue to do that. All right. I hope this helped, and thanks for watching, guys. Keep